We're going to take a look at bone structure. So bones are organs because remember, they possess several types of tissues within them. So bone obviously is connective tissue, but there's also going to be nervous tissue, blood in there as well, which is a connective tissue, um, and then muscle attached to bone as well. But bone is osseous tissue, but it also has the nervous tissue, cartilage, fibrous connective tissue, muscle, epithelial cells, and blood vessels. So pretty much all four types. So we're going to take a look at it on the gross level, the microscopic level, as well as the chemical level. So this slide is kind of showing the gross level, the gross anatomy level. So there's two main types of bones. There's compact bone and spongy bone. Compact bone is also called lamellar bone, and spongy bone is also called trabecular bone. Compact bone has this dense outer layer to it, and spongy bone has these needle-like flat pieces, which we call trabeculae. Hence, the name trabecular refers to spongy bone. Trabecular bone has open spaces between the trabeculae filled with red or yellow bone marrow. So when we look at this image right here, this is probably of the femur, but it could represent the humerus as well, the proximal end of it. So if we were to draw a line right here, we could separate the what's called the epiphysis. Specifically, it would be the proximal epiphysis because it's closest to the girdle. And this region right here would be called the diaphysis, which is the shaft of the long bone. Again, you can see the spongy bone has these bony spines called trabeculae, and compact bone looks smooth and solid. And we'll see what the lamellae are coming up. If we look at the gross anatomy of a flat bone, or short or irregular, any of those three, they have thin plates of spongy bone, which is called diploe. And the way it kind of looks is that the compact bone actually sandwiches um, the spongy bone. So it's almost like the compact bone would be the pieces of bread, and between that would be the spongy bone. So the periosteum, which remember was a term for just bone, covers the outside of the compact bone. And the endosteum would cover the inside portion of the compact bone. And it's basically the membrane that is located between the compact bone and the spongy bone. As you saw from the previous slide, bone matter is scattered throughout the spongy bone, and hyaline cartilage covers the ends of that bone. And again, when it does, it's referred to as articular cartilage. But remember, articular cartilage is a subtype of hyaline cartilage. And here's our bony spines, which are the trabeculae. And within this area would be located marrow. Our next slide is now going a little bit more in depth. This is the structure of a long bone, and all long bones have this shaft called the diaphysis, which I've already mentioned. Bone ends are called epiphyses. There's a proximal epiphysis and a distal epiphysis. And the diaphysis is this tubular shaft that forms a long axis. It has spongy compact bone surrounding the central medullary cavity. And as adults, we only have yellow marrow in it. So, for example, in adults, red marrow is really only found in two locations, mostly. It's also found a little bit in the sternum, but it's found in the proximal epiphyses of the two largest long bones. That would be the thigh bone, the femur, and the arm bone, which is the humerus. We can see some other structures here. Again, the epiphysis is covered by articular cartilage. Between the epiphysis and the diaphysis is what's called the epiphyseal plate or growth plate, and that develops into the epiphyseal line, which we can see right here. And that originally was cartilage up until adulthood. That development of cartilage is interstitial growth. The periosteum is the outer membrane of the compact bone, and the endosteum is the inner membrane. And the endosteum would be basically the barrier between the compact and the spongy bone. You can see compact bone shown here, which we'll be talking about coming up. The ends of the long bone at the joint are covered by articular cartilage, and we have spongy bone shown in the epiphysis and a little bit at the proximal end of the diaphysis. We can see our compact bone shown here is again. This image is just kind of enlarging this part right here. In the center of the diaphysis is the medullary cavity lined by the endosteum. Within that is the yellow bone marrow, what's called a nutrient foramen. And any time you see the word foramen, that could be a hole for a blood vessel or a nerve. The outer membrane, as we know now, is the periosteum. There's an important artery that goes into the blood called the nutrient artery. And then we have important connective tissue collagen fibers called perforating fibers. A good analogy for this is imagine the stringy substance that you see when you're peeling an orange. That's kind of what the perforating fibers look like. And they are also called Sharpie's fibers as well. On the next slide, we have these membranes just in a little more detail. Remember, they're the periosteum and the endosteum. The periosteum is the double-layered membrane that covers the external surface. The outer layer is a fibrous layer, which is connected to these Sharpie's fibers. And it contains nerve fibers and continues on to the shaft through the nutrient foramen opening. And then the inner membrane is the endosteum, which covers the internal bone surface. And then within the tissue is hematopoietic tissue. This means it has the ability for blood cell development. So red marrow is found in trabecular cavities of spongy bone and diploe of flat bones like the sternum. I've already mentioned where red marrow is predominantly found in adults. It's in the heads of the femur and the humerus, and in flat bones like the sternum, and sometimes the hip bone. Yellow marrow can be converted back to red, though, if it's needed. So if a patient becomes anemic, the yellow can be converted back to the red.